3 full years after moving to Medford, an ordinary small town in central Ohio with a permanent population of under 20,000, I had completely shed any romanticized notions of the American lifestyle. The world often sees California's sunny beaches, New York's neon skyscrapers, and Seattle's misty, rain-swept evenings on screen. People naturally assume that the lives of ordinary Americans are free and relaxed, governed by clear rules, and dignified and smooth sailing. Yet, only an outsider who has put down roots here, paying taxes, taking walks, interacting with others, and dealing with the trivialities of daily life, truly understands the reality. Beneath the surface of this land that champions the rule of law, rationality, and freedom lie countless petty, absurd, baffling, and wryly amusing quirks of everyday life. There are no earth-shattering crimes or dramatic sagas of love and hate here. Instead, there are simply the bizarre, everyday moments involving ordinary office workers, retirees, convenience store clerks, local civil servants, and neighbors, absurdities woven into the very fabric of grassroots American life. Every story I am about to tell is entirely faithful to reality. There is no artistic exaggeration or dramatic embellishment. Every minor detail is backed by municipal records, neighborly testimony, and saved receipts. The narration matches the rhythm of casual conversation, paced deliberately with natural pauses, and unfolds in a straightforward, matter-of-fact style, immersing you in the life of an ordinary American filled with absurdly trivial matters. What shattered my preconceptions first were the neighborhood rules, rigid to the extreme and riddled with outrageous double standards. When I moved into my first detached wooden house in the small town, the real estate agent repeatedly emphasized the Ohio Property Code. Homeowners of detached houses must mow their lawns weekly, and the grass height must not exceed 8 centimeters. If it exceeded this limit, the municipality wouldn't bother with a reminder. They would automatically issue a fine, $180 per violation. The fine doubled after 3 days, and after a week, it led to a court summons and the freezing of personal accounts. Initially, I thought this was reasonable. Maintaining a tidy lawn is, after all, a resident's obligation. However, during my second week, Medford was hit by a once-in-a-century stretch of continuous spring rain. It poured for 9 straight days, leaving the soil saturated, soft, and mucky. A single step would sink you ankle-deep in mud, and running a lawnmower over it guaranteed the engine would burn out. Even the local gardeners, who had been tending the area for 30 years, had collectively stopped working. Vegetation across town was running wild, and every household's lawn was choked with weeds. I assumed that since this was a case of force majeure, an unavoidable natural event, the municipality would surely grant a discretionary exemption. Yet, on the 9th day, when the rain finally stopped and the skies cleared, I received a paper fine from the city by mail at 7:30 a.m., accompanied by simultaneous notifications via text and email, demanding the full $180 without a cent of leniency. I called the municipal hotline to appeal. The operator was polite in tone but icy in delivery, reciting the state code verbatim. Abnormal weather was not a valid ground for exemption, and lawn regulations were based solely on vegetation height, not meteorological conditions. I countered by asking about an elderly white woman living alone in the next block, whose yard was overgrown with knee-high weeds and piled high with dead branches, unkempt for 6 months, yet she had received no fine. After a 30-second silence, the operator informed me that the woman belonged to a local grassroots gardening and conservation association. The wild weeds in her yard were classified as native vegetation protected by ecological conservation laws and thus did not require trimming. That was the moment I first grasped the most absurd underlying logic of American life. When it comes to overgrown grass, ordinary people pay to have it cut, whereas those with the backing of a homeowners association can simply let it go wild and remain compliant. Rules are never a universal standard. They are tools for gatekeeping based on social strata. To avoid repeated fines, I once braved the rain to mow the lawn, propping up the tires to handle the wet ground and wearing a raincoat, only to splatter mud all over the exterior walls. The next day, I received a second fine for $220. The citation? Muddy water from mowing had soiled the public-facing exterior wall, violating community aesthetic standards. I was left dumbfounded. Mowing was a violation, and so was not mowing. Working in the rain was a violation, and so was stopping work on a sunny day. This town's 120 community bylaws could turn a law-abiding citizen into a habitual rule-breaker. Even more bizarre than the neighborhood regulations was the slacker-style diligence of local officials. While many imagine Western civil servants as rigorous and efficient, the local officials in this Midwestern town practiced a philosophy of doing the absolute bare minimum, not a second of overtime while on the clock, zero engagement with duties once off the clock, and an attitude that was rigidly dogmatic within their scope of get-off work, yet utterly indifferent to anything outside it. Observing the process firsthand, I went to the small town's municipal hall to complete my residency registration. Although there were 6 service counters in total, ostensibly open Monday through Friday, only 2 were actually staffed at any given time. The employees at the other 4 were perpetually on paid leave, sick leave, or attending social worker training. After queuing for 2 hours, it was finally my turn. The clerk typed at a leisurely pace, then paused mid-task to smile and inform me that their lunch break had arrived. U.S. labor laws are sacrosanct. Regardless of whether there were 50 people in line, the workday was ending, or a transaction was halfway through, the 30-minute lunch break required leaving the post on time, shutting down the computer and lowering the service window shutter. No one could rush them. Doing so would constitute workplace harassment and could lead to a lawsuit against the municipality. I had no choice but to get back in line, spending another hour to finish the basic registration. Once done, I casually asked about the delivery timeframe for my social security card. The clerk consulted a thick manual, checked line by line, and informed me that delivery times varied based on conditions: sunny weather, rain, high temperatures, or low temperatures. Given the current temperature of 2 at 12 degrees Celsius, considered mild weather, the mailing turnaround is 17 to 22 business days. When I questioned why the time frame couldn't be standardized, the explanation was earnest. If it's too hot, mail carriers might suffer heatstroke, leading to labor disputes. If it's too cold, vehicles might break down, incurring repair costs. And on rainy days, document damage during delivery could trigger administrative compensation claims. Every measure is taken to avoid liability risks associated with public service. They would rather drag out the process than perform their duties efficiently. What is truly absurd, however, is that this bare minimum effort attitude, prioritizing self-preservation, applies only to routine public services. When it comes to revenue-generating activities, such as collecting property taxes, issuing violation fines, or recovering overdue fees, 3 town departments coordinate seamlessly to wrap things up in 10 minutes flat. They work overtime on holidays and process automatic deductions in the middle of the night without a second's delay. This extreme double standard in public service permeates the daily lives of ordinary Americans. Hidden within the mundane details of food, clothing, housing, and transport are countless bizarre rules that defy common sense. Take, for instance, the water and electricity services essential to every household. The Medford municipal water supply is explicitly certified as safe for direct consumption, with monthly water quality reports showing metrics that far exceed standard drinking water requirements. Yet, 90% of the locals in town absolutely refuse to drink tap water directly. It isn't a matter of taste. Everyone was spooked by an outrageous legal precedent regarding compensation. 3 years ago, a resident drank tap water and experienced mild bloating, no vomiting, no fever, and no medical treatment required, just a general sense of discomfort. They hired a lawyer to sue the municipal water department, claiming $12,000 in damages for emotional distress. The court ruled in the resident's favor on the spot, and the water department paid the full amount. Since then, every public tap and residential water inlet in town has displayed a bold warning label: tap water meets standards but direct consumption is prohibited. The water department accepts no liability for any discomfort resulting from consumption. Spending heavily to maintain water quality and publish test results while simultaneously issuing mandatory warnings against drinking the water, this surreal, upside-down approach has become accepted common knowledge among the townspeople. The situation with the power grid is even more absurd. The U.S. grid is privatized and operated in fragmented sectors, meaning the town is split among 3 different utility companies. The service line to my front yard belongs to Company A, the line for the charging station in my backyard belongs to Company B, and the garage. The lighting circuits fell under the jurisdiction of Power Company C. The 3 companies utilized mutually incompatible billing systems, disconnected repair reporting channels, and conflicting fault assessment criteria. On a sweltering midsummer night, the power to my entire home suddenly cut out. I called the emergency repair hotlines for all 3 companies one by one. Company A verified that the external lines were intact and refused to dispatch a crew, deeming the issue outside their service scope. Company B checked the EV charging station, found no faults, and deflected responsibility by claiming it was an internal wiring issue, leaving me to cover the repair costs myself. Company C simply replied that their entire staff was at a team-building event and that labor laws prohibited overtime for emergency repairs. For 8 hours on that 40-degree summer night, I was left without power, all the fresh food in my refrigerator spoiled, and the indoor temperature soared to 38 degrees. I filed a complaint with the State Power Regulatory Bureau, only to be told that all 3 companies had acted in compliance with regulations. Under privatization, the division of rights and responsibilities was clearly defined. meaning there was no party at fault. The homeowner had to bear the losses alone. The ultimate irony? The town's wealthy enclave had signed an exclusive power supply agreement. Despite sharing the same grid infrastructure, outages in the wealthy area were resolved with lightning speed, usually within 10 minutes, and occurred no more than 3 times a year, whereas outages were the norm in the ordinary residential area, where repair requests were met with endless buck passing. When it comes to electricity, despite sharing the same grid, access to power is stratified by wealth. Meanwhile, in the realms of pricing and consumption, ordinary Americans face a daily reality that is both suffocating and absurd. Outsiders often remark on how cheap fresh produce and meat are in U.S. supermarkets, yet a host of invisible, bizarre surcharges can instantly empty one's wallet. I once went to a local Kroger supermarket to buy basic ingredients. I picked out a head of fresh broccoli weighing 1.2 pounds. The listed price was $1.29, but the final bill came to $2.17. The extra costs were broken down into 3 items: a $0.20 eco-friendly disposal fee for fresh produce, a $0.33 visual quality inspection fee for fruits and vegetables, and a $0.35 shelf lighting and preservation fee. The cashier explained, without a hint of emotion, that produce requires specific lighting to maintain color and freshness, and since lighting energy costs aren't included in the product price, they must be charged separately. Furthermore, waste leaves and scraps from fresh produce are classified differently from standard supermarket trash, requiring a special removal fee. Customers must pay this waste disposal fee upfront, even when purchasing pristine vegetables. I also bought a box of frozen chicken breasts listed at $5.00, but at checkout, an additional. There is a $0.42 animal welfare surcharge levied on the sale of poultry products. The legal basis for this is a requirement to prepay compensation for the post-mortem handling of the livestock. Even though the broiler chickens are raised via intensive industrial methods and have long since been slaughtered and packaged, the customer is still made to pay for the animal's emotional well-being. Even more absurd is the packaging fee structure. If you bring your own shopping bag, you are charged a $0.18 container verification fee so the store can confirm the bag is non-toxic and won't contaminate the merchandise. If you use the store's own bag, you are hit with a $0.25 plastic recycling tax. Either way, whether you bring your own bag or buy one there, you are forced to pay. Dining in is even more surreal. At a local burger joint, a single cheeseburger costs $9, but 4 mandatory surcharges are automatically added to the bill: a fund for restaurant worker emergency first aid, a fee for kitchen ventilation and noise reduction, a charge for antimicrobial tableware sanitization, and a shared liability fee to cover risks to pedestrians outside the store. These add up to an extra $2.60. These aren't optional service charges, they are mandatory fees collected on behalf of the State Restaurant Association. Many tourists new to the U.S. are baffled by the bill and question the arbitrary charges, only for the shopkeeper to produce a thick volume of regulations in response. Refusing payment constitutes a breach of commercial contract and can lead to police intervention and detention. Meanwhile, tipping culture has morphed into an absurd rule that amounts to a form of moral coercion imposed on the general public. Base wages in the service industry fall far below the minimum hourly rate, with the government tacitly allowing employers to suppress pay and shift the entire burden of employee income onto customer tips, effectively offloading labor costs with a sense of entitlement. For a $30 haircut, a mandatory minimum tip of $6 is required. If a customer refuses to tip, the barber may halt the service on the spot and refuse to finish the job. At self-service gas stations, where there is no human assistance whatsoever, the pump automatically displays a tipping prompt that cannot be skipped or closed. One is forced to select a 10% tip, or else the transaction cannot be finalized and the nozzle released. Even at automated dry cleaning facilities, where drop-off, sorting, and pickup are all handled by the customer and the machines operate autonomously, a mandatory service tip is tacked onto the final bill. Staff bluntly explain that the tip isn't for the service itself but for the security guard on duty, meaning the fee is charged regardless of whether there was any human interaction. One of the most absurd consumer disputes I ever encountered involved my neighbor Charlie, a retired truck driver who ordered a pair of $15 cotton lounge shorts online. Upon delivery, the item ran small, so Charlie requested a return under the no questions asked policy. The merchant agreed to the return and refund but simultaneously charged 8 separate miscellaneous return fees: printing the shipping label, warehouse unboxing and inspection, sanitizing the returned item, restocking and redisplaying, filing after-sales paperwork, interstate logistics coordination, packaging disposal, and creating a customer service ticket. These 8 fees totaled $17.20, meaning Charlie would actually lose $2.20 by returning the item, so he decided to just keep and wear it. Furious, Charlie called a consumer rights hotline, only for the agency to rule that the merchant's charges were compliant. Their reasoning was that the no questions asked policy guaranteed a refund of the purchase price but did not cover the waiver of additional administrative fees. From then on, Charlie became known in the small town for calculating return costs before buying anything online. For the vast majority of affordable goods, the cost of returning them exceeded the item's price, effectively stripping ordinary people of their right to return or exchange merchandise. Yet, even more absurd than these consumer policies was the extreme affectation and double standards found in the neighborhood's social interactions. Residents appeared warm and friendly, waving and hugging upon meeting, hosting weekend potlucks, and exchanging holiday gifts with impeccable social graces. But in reality, the obsession with property boundaries and the pettiness of the rules bordered on the pathological. During my first month there, hoping to foster good neighborly relations, I spent 2 hours one weekend, after mowing my own lawn, cleaning the shared public drainage ditch between our properties. I pulled weeds and cleared out accumulated fallen leaves. The very next day, I received a formal written complaint from my white female neighbor, filed with the Municipal Neighborhood Mediation Office. Her grievances were absurd. She claimed I had unauthorizedly repaired shared public infrastructure, infringed upon her right to be informed regarding her property's appurtenances, and altered the vegetation layout along the boundary line, thereby causing her psychological distress. She demanded a public written apology, $350 in compensation for emotional distress, and the restoration of the ditch to its original, filthy, and cluttered state. I was completely dumbfounded. Doing a good deed by cleaning a public ditch had somehow resulted in legal violations and infringement. When a mediator visited to discuss the matter, they bluntly explained the legal principles governing U.S. property boundaries. Every inch of land, every blade of grass, every leaf, and every drop of water along the boundary line is jointly owned by both parties. Even if an area is public and unsightly, neither party may unilaterally improve or repair it. Doing so requires submitting a written notice 15 days in advance, posting a public notice online, and obtaining signed consent from the neighbor, and missing even one of these steps, you simply cannot do it. Performing a good deed without permission is tantamount to a violation or infringement. Conversely, consider the situation where a neighbor's dead branches constantly overhang my yard, poison ivy climbs my exterior walls, and roots penetrate my foundation. When I approached them to request a cleanup, they flatly refused, citing a legal justification. Plants have the right to grow freely, natural vegetation growth does not constitute human-caused infringement, and a homeowner has no right to trim encroaching greenery. The rules are completely inverted. Doing good is a violation, while negligence is perfectly legal. On another occasion, a windy, chilly late autumn evening, a wool shawl hanging outside the neighbor's house blew into my patio. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and placed it on their doorstep. The next day, I received a complaint alleging that touching private property without permission infringed upon the owner's privacy rights regarding their belongings. It made no difference that the item had been lost to the wind or that I had returned it in good faith. The mere act of touching it constituted an infringement. I was forced to sign a mediation agreement promising that, should I find the neighbor's belongings in the future, I would strictly refrain from touching, picking up, or moving them. Instead, I must leave them exactly where found and wait 24 hours for the owner to retrieve them, accepting that any damage or loss caused by rain or snow would be the owner's sole responsibility. One must never offer help out of kindness. That is the unspoken survival rule among neighbors in these small towns. Yet, this strict adherence to boundaries can instantly collapse without limit. Come tax refund season, Halloween, or Christmas, neighbors who usually draw hard lines and yield nothing will suddenly swarm your doorstep demanding gifts, holiday candy, or information for mutual tax refund assistance. They feel entitled to share in these conveniences. Refusing to share is branded as cold, mean-spirited, or racially exclusionary, while compliance is seen as neighborly harmony. This fractured social logic is rooted in every street of grassroots America, forcing ordinary people to learn indifference as a means of self-preservation, where warmth can actually become a legal liability. The most dramatic, and absurd, group in these towns consists of the vast number of licensed mental health practitioners and the increasingly broad diagnoses of mental illness. Mental health laws across the U.S. have become more granular year by year. Originally intended to protect those with psychological disorders, they have now become completely distorted, serving as a universal get-out-of-jail-free card for ordinary people to shirk responsibility, pick fights, or use their condition as a shield. In a town with a permanent population of 18,000, the number of licensed counselors, social workers, and mental health rehabilitation specialists There are 114 of them in total, averaging one mental health professional for every 158 residents, a density far exceeding that of general practitioners. Whether it involves workplace errors, neighborhood disputes, traffic violations, unpaid bills, or public disturbances, simply submitting a brief self-assessment scale in court, checking off boxes for anxiety, hypersensitivity, and mild depression, grants immediate immunity from consequences. Take, for instance, a night shift bartender at a downstairs pub who showed up drunk, spilled drinks, and verbally abused customers. After being fired, he submitted a psychological assessment attributing his behavior to an emotional disorder triggered by the workplace environment. A labor arbitration ruling declared the dismissal unlawful, awarding him 6 months' wages in compensation. Or consider a driver who ran a red light and scraped a private car while driving against traffic. By presenting medical records for anxiety in court, he had his traffic penalty halved and the suspension of his license stayed. Then there were the overdue utility and property management bills, 6 months in arrears, where, on the day of the hearing regarding asset preservation, the submission of proof of insomnia and emotional distress led the court to postpone enforcement and immediately lift the asset freezing order. Most outrageous of all is Linda, a full-time stay-at-home mom I know. She let her housework slide completely, allowed the yard to become overgrown with weeds, and fell behind on property taxes upon receiving an eviction notice from the city. Linda paid $120 out of pocket that same day to obtain a diagnosis of mild seasonal affective disorder. The city immediately rescinded the eviction notice, noting in the official record that the housing rights of residents with mental health vulnerabilities took precedence, effectively indefinitely deferring enforcement of property maintenance codes. It was a system where law-abiding residents were forced to mow their lawns in the rain and fined for minor infractions, while residents who obtained licenses to slack off were indulged and exempted from the consequences of their violations. The scales of justice were completely lopsided. Even more surreal was the absurdly low threshold for a mental health diagnosis. One could fill out a simple 22-question online survey and pay a fee to receive a certificate in 10 minutes. No in-person consultation, physical exam, or medical history verification required. Half the town's deadbeat underclass held these emotional disorder diagnoses like get-out-of-jail-free cards for daily life. Meanwhile, ordinary people who diligently paid taxes, followed the rules, and never caused trouble had no safety net. They were held fully accountable for any mistake, with no leniency whatsoever. I once attended a town community hearing where a public official openly admitted that these broad mental health exemptions weren't about medical needs, but about the cost of maintaining social stability. Penalizing law-abiding citizens caused little controversy, whereas exempting licensed troublemakers avoided public relations backlash. It was the simplest form of administrative buck passing, with the ultimate cost borne entirely by honest, hard-working people. The bizarre chaos of the American workplace also shattered any illusion of high-paying, dignified employment. While many yearn for the American standard of an 8-hour workday, labor protections, and weekends off, the reality of entry-level workplaces involves rigid rules, absurd internal friction, and a complete inversion of priorities. When I took a part-time job at a local home improvement store, I was handed a 400-page employee conduct manual on my first day. It detailed everything down to breathing frequency, the curvature of a smile, and the angle of a turn. The manual stipulated that the angle of a smile when greeting customers had to be maintained between 12 and 15 degrees. Too small an angle was deemed indifferent, while too large an angle was seen as obsequious flattery. Surveillance cameras would capture any violation. Violations result in a $5 hourly wage deduction. Standing posture requires feet angled at 45 degrees with legs together. Legs spread too wide counts as a posture violation, while keeping feet too close together is deemed passive loafing. Eye contact with customers must last between 2 and 5 seconds per instance. Too short implies indifference, while too long suggests offense or harassment. The store's back-end system employs 270 AI-powered posture monitors capturing footage around the clock. Deductions are automatic, requiring no human review. Labor laws protect every absurd demand, yet offer no protection for those who simply work hard. Consider a night shift cleaner who worked diligently for 5 years without a single error. When an old back injury flared up, slowing her mopping speed, the back-end algorithm flagged it as passive loafing. An automatic penalty notice was issued, deducting her entire day's wages. When she appealed, management replied that workplace injuries fall under medical issues, whereas work efficiency falls under job performance. Physical discomfort does not exempt one from efficiency assessments. The two are treated as separate matters with no mutual coverage. Conversely, a front-end sales associate who was frequently late without cause, watched short videos on the job, left the floor to walk a dog, and refused to assist customers, yet submitted explanations citing emotional fluctuations for every violation, faced no penalties at all. fully shielded by the union. Originally intended to protect workers' rights, the union has become completely distorted at the grassroots level in the U.S. It never defends the rights of diligent employees but specifically shelters those who slack off and shirk duties. The lazier, more entitled, and more prone to complaining an employee is, the stronger the union's protection. Meanwhile, those who are hardworking and patient receive no support, often seeing their wages and benefits penalized instead. Beyond this, there are countless bizarre workplace taboos. Bringing a solid black water bottle is banned as it supposedly conveys negative emotions. Wearing a dark-colored mask is prohibited for creating social barriers, and making loud chewing noises during lunch breaks is deemed disturbing colleagues' mental health. Succulent plants are banned in office areas due to perceived allergy risks. If a complaint arises, the person complained against is penalized immediately, without fact-checking or investigating the circumstances, as the priority is simply to avoid workplace disputes. The healthcare sector is the arena where the American public harbors the most resentment and encounters the most absurd situations. Everyone knows medical care in the U.S. is expensive, but few realize the process is so bizarre it defies common sense. At a small-town public community hospital, even for basic consultations, prescribing medication or checking blood pressure, licensed physicians are barred from direct interaction with patients. One must first book an appointment with a licensed medical social worker. The social worker conducts an interview to assess emotional state, life stress, and family conflicts, issuing a mental health clearance before a doctor will see the patient. Even for purely physiological ailments like hypertension, gastroenteritis, or allergies, a top-tier emergency room can legally refuse treatment without that social worker's emotional clearance. I once went to the ER late at night for severe spring pollen allergies, suffering from nasal congestion, coughing, and wheezing, only to be told at triage that I lacked the prerequisite mental health screening report and my treatment would be delayed. I was forced to pay $145 on the spot for a half-hour emotional screening, checking boxes to confirm no suicidal tendencies, interpersonal grievances, or environmental anxieties, and upon receiving the paper certificate, I was cleared by triage. The attending physician consulted me for 3 minutes and prescribed 2 boxes of allergy medication. The total bill for registration, screening, emergency services, and paperwork came to $896, excluding the cost of the medication. The most absurd aspect was the triage priority system. Traumatic bleeding, fractures, and febrile seizures did not qualify as high-priority emergencies, whereas a mental breakdown, loss of emotional control, or weeping in public were classified as level 1 high-risk emergencies, granting immediate hospital-wide attention, no waiting, and partial fee waivers. I witnessed this scenario repeatedly in the small town. An ordinary person suffering excruciating pain from acute appendicitis would wait 4 hours to be seen, while a patient in the next room seeking care for mild anxiety. Patients in such states are fast-tracked for immediate admission. Hospital administrators explain that while the risk of death from physical ailments is manageable, a loss of emotional control can easily trigger extreme public incidents, making the maintenance of social stability a higher priority than medical treatment. Ambulance billing practices are even more outrageous. Charges begin the moment the call connects and dispatch creates a file, even if the vehicle never leaves the station or provides aid. There is a base fee of $1,400. Simply driving out the hospital gate triggers an additional $500 mileage fee, and the use of protective gloves by medical staff incurs a surcharge for consumables. Even if one cancels the call immediately after dialing, the full fee is still deducted. Courts rule that since dispatch resources were occupied and public medical resources were irreversibly consumed, the citizen must pay in full. Meanwhile, health insurance reimbursement rules are a labyrinth of red tape. Routine care for minor ailments is rarely covered, yet exorbitant fees for psychiatric therapy, emotional counseling, and useless wellness programs are reimbursed at high rates. Public health funds are heavily skewed toward nebulous psychological treatments, placing the financial burden of essential basic healthcare squarely on the individual. Housing and taxation hide a form of invisible exploitation that leaves ordinary Americans with no recourse. Many believe homeownership implies permanent rights, yet they must pay property taxes in perpetuity. Valuations for small-town homes fluctuate annually. If the assessed value rises, taxes increase automatically, regardless of circumstances. Even if a house falls into disrepair or the neighborhood declines in value, taxes never decrease. Property valuations are unilaterally determined by the Municipal Assessment Board. Homeowners have no right to challenge the valuation itself, only the payment schedule. My own property tax was $2,700 the first year. The following year, despite the home having the same layout and finishes, with no renovations, the municipality automatically raised the valuation, causing taxes to skyrocket to $4,100. The justification? Improved greenery in the neighborhood and a higher livability index supposedly increased the property's value. It is an absurd, inverted logic. Because the grass and trees grew lush, ordinary people have to pay more. The situation is utterly absurd. On top of property taxes, residents are hit with 4 additional monthly levies covering shared costs for neighborhood security, road maintenance, fire safety operations, and drainage networks. These fees must be paid regardless of whether the home is occupied or the services are actually used. The fire safety levy is the most outrageous, despite the town recording 0 major fires and fire trucks remaining idle all year without a single deployment. The fee rises annually. The official municipal justification? 0 fires prove the fire service's effectiveness, justifying higher performance bonuses, which in turn drives up the shared costs charged to residents. The security levy follows the same twisted logic. The fewer incidents and the better the public order, the higher the police performance rating, and the more residents pay for security. The cost of living lawfully and peacefully skyrockets in inverse proportion to actual need. Renting is no escape from these bizarre rules. Tenants are forbidden from painting walls, changing locks, hanging wallpaper, or installing blackout curtains. Even if walls are blackened with mold, locks are jammed, or light leaks in the master bedroom cause insomnia, tenants have no right to make repairs. If a landlord fails to respond to a repair request within 48 hours, the tenants still cannot fix the issue themselves. Unauthorized modifications are treated as property damage, resulting in the forfeiture of the entire security deposit and penalties for breach of contract. Conversely, landlords can freely change locks, enter the home for inspections, or clear out a tenant's belongings, all legally justified simply by presenting proof of ownership. Tenant privacy receives no legal priority. To get a security deposit back, tenants must provide written guarantees that the property is free of pests, odors, and wall scratches. All 3 documents require verification by a licensed third-party inspector, at the tenant's own expense. If the inspection fails, the deposit is lost. If it passes, the inspection fees often far exceed the deposit amount. It is a catch-22, a legal and judicial system that embodies this entire absurdity. At the root of the system lies a chaotic jumble of granular, redundant statutes and contradictory case law. For the average person, the cost of strict legal compliance is exorbitant, while the cost of exploiting loopholes or flouting the law is negligible. A small-town legal worker privately admitted that the cumulative total of active state and federal statutes exceeds 27 million, regulating everything down to the slightest gesture, making 100% compliance impossible. Ordinary people unwittingly commit 15 to 30 violations daily. Public agencies practice selective enforcement. Authorities can secure a conviction whenever they wish to hold someone accountable, or grant absolution whenever they choose to let someone off the hook. An elderly resident living alone was fined $100 and formally reprimanded after a neighbor reported a homemade wooden flag hanging on their balcony, its edges frayed and faded, as a violation of the federal flag code. A local influencer filming a sunset on the street inadvertently captured a private garden bed in the background. They were found liable for illegal surreptitious filming and ordered to pay $1,800 in damages for invasion of privacy. A child picking up naturally fallen acorns from a residential lawn was cited for stealing state-owned natural resources, without the requisite permit from the Department of Natural Resources, forcing the parents to pay an administrative fine. Yet, at the same time, acts such as intentional public nuisance, malicious destruction of neighbors' property, defaulting on massive bills, or workplace malingering are treated leniently or go unpunished, provided the offenders can invoke precedents related to psychological diagnoses, labor rights, or environmental protection. Precedent trumps statute, status trumps rules, and paperwork trumps common sense. These are the underlying, unspoken rules of the American judicial system. Countless bizarre, fragmented daily incidents piece together the authentic, gritty reality of ordinary American life, a small-town Arbor Day event where residents are forced to plant trees on their weekend as unpaid volunteers, supplying their own saplings, tools, water, and fertilizer, and hauling away their own trash afterward, while the municipality photographs the scene to tout its achievements, offering no subsidies or tax credits in return. Participating in tree planting events carries risks. If community collaboration is deemed a breach of trust, it results in a penalty on one's credit record. At public libraries, borrowing a picture book and returning it with faint pencil scribbles from a child incurs a $45 restoration fee, yet if a librarian's handwritten annotations damage the book, no compensation is required. Picking wild daisies by the roadside is illegal, whereas municipal road crews can legally mow down vast swathes of them. Under wild plant protection regulations, ornamental wildflowers are classified as state resources, while weeds are treated as municipal waste. Pet regulations are even more surreal. owning a common local dog requires obtaining a canine temperament certification, a liability waiver regarding neighborhood disturbance, and official registration of designated outdoor waste disposal spots. All three are mandatory, and walking a dog without these permits results in a $500 fine. Conversely, keeping protected species, such as certain snakes, lizards, or venomous spiders, requires no registration, no certification, and no specific housing restrictions, as they are shielded by exotic species conservation laws. Waste sorting is obsessively granular. Ordinary fruit scraps must be separated into three distinct categories: flesh, peel, and pit, with fines for improper sorting. Yet, large supermarkets can landfill truckloads of near-expiry food daily without penalty, as it is classified as commercial waste. Even funeral arrangements reveal stark disparities. Plots in public cemeteries are strictly regulated regarding dimensions, tombstone font size, and the number of floral tributes, with fines imposed for any non-compliant adjustments. Meanwhile, private cemeteries for the wealthy expand at will, adding sculptures and hosting all-night ceremonies, exempt from municipal zoning and funeral regulations. Over the past 3 years, I have witnessed countless newcomers arrive in the U.S. to chase their dreams, fueled by fantasies of freedom and prosperity. Some exhaust their savings to settle here, while others abandon the stability of their homelands to build a life abroad. Initially, everyone is captivated by the screen-perfect image of the American dream: sunshine, liberty, fairness, and simplicity, but as they put down roots, day after day. One day, I finally saw through the absurd core of this land. It possesses hyper-specific rules yet lacks a unified, fair baseline. It has comprehensive, convoluted statutes yet is rife with selective enforcement and double standards. It vastly amplifies the rights of niche groups, fringe demands, and exemptions for those who simply give up, while constantly squeezing the living space of ordinary, law-abiding citizens. It prioritizes bureaucratic procedures, paperwork, and industry endorsements while utterly disregarding human sentiment, common sense, and simple justice. These bizarre phenomena are not merely the result of individual official negligence or local anomalies. They are structural contradictions solidified over years of grassroots American social functioning. Beneath a polished, prosperous exterior lies a daily reality that is fragmented, twisted, topsy-turvy, and consumed by intractable internal friction. Many ask why, having witnessed so much absurdity and triviality, I don't return home immediately. The answer is simple: every city and every country has a flip side to its glamour and cracks in its everyday life. I document these stories not to smear or show prejudice, but to reveal the authentic lives of ordinary Americans, lives never captured in film edits or beautified by immigration propaganda. There are no earth-shattering crimes or legendary adventures here, only the mundane, gritty details of mowing lawns, paying bills, squabbling with neighbors, navigating healthcare and bureaucracy, and working to support a family. It is precisely these trivial, bizarre, and petty matters that piece together the truest portrait of American life. It is imperfect, unromantic, and full of contradictions, rigid yet pretentious, rational yet absurd, free yet constrained. It champions fairness and justice while tacitly allowing systemic bias. It preaches that hard work leads to wealth while shielding those who choose to opt out and do nothing. This is the ordinary life that countless Americans live day in and day out, inescapable and unyielding, and it is the raw, unvarnished, and often wryly amusing reality of life in a foreign land, hidden beneath the glossy filter of prosperity.
Many people form their impressions of the U.S. through movies, TV shows, and short videos, often assuming that the outrageous incidents seen there stem solely from extreme cases involving the homeless, radical activists, or violent crimes, while believing the vast majority of ordinary citizens to be polite, reasonable, law-abiding folks living quiet, uneventful lives. However, having settled 5 years ago in Canton, a small suburban town in eastern Pennsylvania, and immersed myself in the quintessential middle-class community, I have interacted exclusively with locals who hold steady jobs, pay their taxes on time, have no history of mental illness or criminal records, and possess higher education degrees. These include teachers, accountants, auto mechanics, supermarket staff, social workers, postal clerks, and stay-at-home parents, the very definition of normal Americans. Yet, once the veneer of social pleasantries is stripped away, the underlying traits revealed in their daily routines, their meals, neighborhood interactions, errands, then commutes, expose a level of stubbornness, double standards, bizarre logic, and surreal rules far more absurd than anything found in sensationalist news headlines. Today, I will spend an hour sharing, in a calm, unhurried narrative, a collection of stories gathered over these 5 years. These are 100% authentic accounts of the lives of ordinary people, free from dramatic embellishment, told as a continuous, unbroken stream. The tone is conversational and steady, suitable for a full original voiceover narration. The story begins in the late autumn of my first year in the town of Canton. I was 32 at the time, having just returned from an overseas assignment. I rented a 2-story, detached wooden house on the outskirts of town for $1,580 a month, the rate that covered the homeowners association fee but excluded utilities, trash removal, and community service surcharges. Canton has a permanent population of 12,000, there are no bustling commercial districts or tourists. The entire area is enveloped by maple forests, the streets are clean and tidy, and every household takes pride in manicured lawns and fresh flowers at the doorstep. Neighbors wave and greet one another. First impressions are always peaceful and dignified. Yet, on my very first day, the first strange incident occurred just as the move was wrapping up. Mark, the mover handling my furniture, the 39-year-old Pennsylvania native, married with 2 children, and a steady employee with 11 years of experience, had a clean track record and an honest, unassuming demeanor. However, after all the furniture had been unloaded, Mark refused to finalize the sign-off. Instead, he produced a 7-page, handwritten supplemental moving document. He demanded I sign the handwritten agreement item by item. It was not a standard industry contract but something Mark had drafted entirely himself. Article 1. For 3 hours after the move, I was forbidden from mopping the floors or dusting. The rationale was that dust carries the memories of the furniture's migration, and cleaning it would erase the object's souls and inflict psychological injury on the worker's professional spirit, requiring $850 in emotional distress compensation. Article 2. All curtains had to remain half-open at a 45-degree angle. A deviation of even 1 degree would be deemed a disruption of the blessing field for the move, resulting in a $120 fine per instance. Article 3. I was strictly prohibited from looking directly at the backs of Mark's hands, considered a sacred zone of a craftsman's labor, as a direct gaze from an outsider would offend the dignity of the work. Article 4. Consuming yellow foods, such as corn, pumpkin, butter, or egg yolks, was banned at dinner that day. Yellow was said to dissipate the luck, ensuring a safe move and could cause future workplace injuries for the crew. If I refused to sign, Mark threatened to unload all the furniture right there and haul it back to the origin while still charging the full moving fee. I immediately checked the Pennsylvania Transportation Labor Regulations, but found no such clauses in the industry rules. When I challenged Mark on his arbitrary imposition of these regulations, he produced a registration receipt for Community Folk Custom practitioners. He informed me that manual laborers in the town held exemptions based on local customs, meaning their self-imposed work rules carried legal weight and were tacitly approved by the community's legal department. Complaints, police reports, and legal challenges would all be futile. To avoid massive financial loss and the hassle of hauling the furniture back and forth, I had no choice but to sign every item. After the move, I sat motionless for 3 hours, daring not to sweep, adjust the curtains, or eat eggs, and stared at the cardboard boxes and dust covering the floor. For the first time, I realized how an ordinary, hard-working American blue-collar worker, someone just trying to make a living, could leverage vague folk custom exemptions to invent rules out of thin air and dictate the daily lives of ordinary people. Once settled in, I began to get to know the neighbors. The resident at No. 45, diagonally across the street, was Sherry, a 42-year-old public elementary school reading teacher with a master's degree and 18 years of teaching experience. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and highly regarded in the neighborhood. To everyone else, she appeared to be an elegant and refined intellectual, yet she harbored a set of idiosyncratic, obsessive rules that outsiders found incomprehensible. She had 17 white daisies planted on the lawn in front of her house, and she mandated that every resident on the street, when passing by, maintain a fixed stride length of exactly 42 centimeters. Any stride that was too long or too short, or any gait characterized by shuffling or overly brisk movement, was deemed a violation that trampled upon the daisies' emotional energy field and disturbed their psychological well-being. A first offense and a verbal warning, the second resulted in a handwritten fine of $150. This money was not remitted to the community association but was instead deposited entirely into her personal plant care and affection fund. During my second week in town, I stepped out one morning to buy groceries and walked past her house at a normal, steady pace. My stride deviated by a mere 6 centimeters. Shirley immediately set down her coffee, grabbed a paper citation, and hurried over to intercept me. Her language was polite, yet her logic was absurd. She explained that plants possess sentient personalities and that the daisies constantly absorb the cadence of pedestrians' footsteps. Irregular rhythms, she claimed, induced anxiety in the plants, anxiety equivalent to animal abuse and thus a minor legal infraction. When I produced a tape measure to verify my stride on the spot, the margin of error was negligible, well within the range of normal walking. Shirley simply produced a supplementary clause to the local neighborhood covenant. She had spearheaded the drafting of this amendment alongside 3 other residents, and the neighborhood committee had tacitly allowed it to take effect. The threshold for amending the town's community covenant was remarkably low. Any 4 permanent residents could jointly propose an addition without the need for public hearings or legal review. And so, a gentle, cultured elementary school teacher used the power of resident-initiated amendments to enact a private law governing the sidewalk in front of her home, dictating the walking rhythm of everyone on the street. For a long time afterward, residents would go out of their way to avoid her house, preferring to take a detour of 200 meters along a side road rather than pass her lawn. It wasn't Shirley herself they feared, but rather that legally binding yet utterly preposterous grassroots amendment. During my first month in town, I visited the community clinic to set up a basic health file and met the nurse, Kara, a 35-year-old with a master's degree in nursing and 8 years of licensed practice. Years of practice without a single blemish on her record. She is meticulous and thorough in her work, and her clinical consultations are highly professional. Yet, she harbors a peculiar internal rule regarding her practice. When residents fill out the occupation field in their registration forms, the use of terms like worker, office staff, or wage earner is strictly prohibited. Kara considers these terms demeaning, viewing them as triggers for her own professional empathetic trauma, and if a forbidden word appears, she flatly refuses to create a file or see the patient, effectively sealing off all appointment records. I once witnessed a building maintenance worker who truthfully listed his occupation as construction worker have his registration rejected on the spot. After 4 consecutive failed appointment attempts, he finally succeeded in getting a consultation only after rewriting his occupation as urban infrastructure collaborative artist. When I later consulted the state medical board, the official response was that a healthcare provider's subjective trauma-related concerns take precedence over administrative form-filling protocols. Medical staff have the right to refuse residents who use inappropriate terminology on forms, a practice deemed both compliant and legal. Here, professional medical staff can alter public medical registration rules based on personal emotions, allowing compliance to override common sense. In November, as the maple leaves fell in droves, the district issued a mandatory ordinance for clearing fallen leaves, a standard rule for towns across the U.S. during autumn and winter, requiring property owners to clear leaves from their frontage on schedule or face daily fines. While this was meant to be a straightforward municipal regulation, the town's sanitation inspection team, comprising just 3 local residents with no formal training or qualifications, concocted a bizarre set of criteria for enforcement. First, red maple leaves were classified as positive mood vegetation that required no cleanup, whereas yellow maple leaves were deemed low mood vegetation that had to be cleared within 24 hours to avoid a fine. Second, fallen leaves on a lawn were considered trash, but those on concrete pavement were classified as natural scenery that could not be swept. Clearing them was deemed an act of damaging the natural landscape, also punishable by a fine. Third, sweeping leaves between midnight and 5 a.m. was strictly prohibited, as late-night cleaning was said to disturb the sleep of the earth and violate community ecological customs. The maple tree in front of my house bore a mix of red and yellow leaves. I faced fines for not sweeping the yellow ones during the day, yet I dared not sweep them at night, nor was I permitted to clear the yellow leaves from the street, all within a brief span of time. In the span of just 10 days, I received 3 sanitation-related citations. When I appealed, the community mediator summarily rejected my case, arguing that ecological perception, an inspector's subjective judgment, superseded written municipal ordinances, leaving ordinary citizens with no grounds to contest the decision. During that period, I realized that the vast majority of grassroots conflicts in America do not stem from legal injustice itself, rather, they arise because countless ordinary people hold the power to interpret the rules. Across various sectors, everyday workers, leveraging their job authority, industry exemptions, or collective community backing, package their personal preferences, private prejudices, and inexplicable moods into compliance regulations that constrain everyone's daily life. As Christmas approached, the town began organizing a community parade. The lead organizer was Eileen, a 44-year-old full-time homemaker with no background in civic administration, an ordinary woman known for her kindness and active involvement in neighborhood affairs. Yet, after taking charge of the parade, she issued a series of absurd prohibitions. First, she banned red Christmas gift boxes from the procession, claiming that the color red was conflict-inducing and liable to trigger emotional distress in sensitive individuals. Second, she forbade the parade bands from playing. For musical pieces exceeding 90 beats per minute, the fast-paced melodies create a sense of psychological pressure. The most absurd rule prohibits residents from wearing scarves or gloves made of brown fur, on the grounds that the brown hue resembles bear fur and allegedly objectifies wildlife. The 6-member parade organizing committee, comprising ordinary homemakers, supermarket employees, and bakery owners rather than government officials, holds final authority over parade regulations. Municipal authorities do not intervene, maintaining that community-led cultural autonomy takes precedence. On Christmas Eve, Paul, a 56-year-old local bakery owner, was ordered by the committee to stop selling his Christmas gingerbread, which featured brown icing, and to shut down his stall. The committee ruled that the icing's color scheme violated animal rights. Paul, an honest, law-abiding taxpayer with 30 years in the trade, dutifully complied with the shutdown order, though he later privately vented to me about how, after a lifetime of following the rules, he had ultimately been defeated by color regulations devised by ordinary citizens. In the dead of winter, when a water pipe burst, I booked a local licensed plumber for repairs, Arthur, a 41-year-old professional holding a Pennsylvania license. He is a certified professional with transparent, fair pricing, yet before starting any on-site repair, he insists on 5 preliminary conditions, rules he established himself over his 8-year career. First, all clocks in my home must be stopped during the repair. The flow of time supposedly accelerates metal aging and increases the risk of malfunction. Second, I am forbidden from swallowing saliva while the work is underway. Continuous swallowing creates airflow and magnetic fields that interfere with the precision of pipe connections. Third, all mirrors in the house must be covered with black cloth, as their reflections might refract the spiritual energy of the repair process. Fourth, any wastewater generated during the repair must be collected by me personally and poured out toward the east. It cannot simply be drained into the sewer. Fifth, upon completion, I must recite a specific 4-sentence blessing composed by Arthur himself. Missing even a single word renders the repair invalid, voids the warranty, and forfeits the initial payment, requiring a paid redo. When I visited the town's 2 other licensed plumbers, I found that each had their own unique metaphysical rules. One required homeowners to abstain from eating noodles on the day of the repair, while another insisted that all indicator lights on household appliances be turned off. Industry regulators tacitly approved of the practice, explaining that the blue-collar artisans' faith-based labor was constitutionally protected and beyond regulatory interference. When a pipe burst late one freezing night, leaving me no choice, I had to stop the clock, cover the mirrors, suppress the urge to swallow, and recite the required blessing, fully complying with these absurd rituals. After the repair, Arthur casually loosened a pipe seal. 3 days later, the pipe leaked again. He claimed my prayer lacked sincerity and that an unstable magnetic field had caused the malfunction, charging an extra $400 for a faith service upon his return visit. With no recourse for complaint or redress, I found myself at the town post office during a January snowfall. I dealt with Becky, a 51-year-old veteran employee with 20 years of service. She was diligent, had a spotless record, and was highly regarded within the office. She had established an unwritten rule at her counter: any white envelope containing documents had to be accompanied by a green leaf. She believed white paper possessed a void quality that required the natural energy of a green leaf to balance it out. Without a leaf, the mail was flatly rejected. Although federal postal regulations contained no such rule, the postmaster was aware of the practice yet never intervened. In private conversations, it is acknowledged that there is immense tolerance for the eccentricities of grassroots public servants, as long as they do not embezzle public funds or violate criminal law. Any new procedural rules they devise are treated as compliant. I once witnessed an elderly person trying to mail medical insurance documents, lacking the required Hali leaves. The senior had to make 4 round trips, forced to scavenge for leaves along the way, before finally successfully sending the life-saving paperwork. At that same post office, the retired teller working the adjacent window was notorious online as a rule-obsessed eccentric. This individual took it upon themselves to print citizen conduct assessment forms and conduct door-to-door checks on neighbors' daily routines. The town's civil service system tolerated such personal idiosyncrasies, with officials neither interfering with nor correcting one another. As the weather warmed in February, I joined a neighborhood mutual aid group comprising over 200 ordinary residents, office workers, stay-at-home mothers, retirees, and small business owners. The group administrator was a 27-year-old freelance illustrator with no official position or formal management credentials, yet they established internal governance rules that were both absurd and strictly enforced, such as a ban on the words rain, cold wind, and withered grass, as the administrator had been injured in a fall on a rainy day during childhood, and these terms triggered a stress response. Penalties: for every instance of a prohibited word being sent, a fine of $25 is levied and transferred directly into the administrator's personal account. Regarding casual neighborhood chatter, the posting of vertically oriented images is banned, as such compositions disrupt the emotional atmosphere. When sharing photos of home-cooked meals, posting images featuring potatoes or lotus roots is forbidden. These root vegetables symbolize repression and are deemed detrimental to the community's mental health. Once, a neighbor casually shared a photo of laundry drying on a rainy day. This triggered a prohibited keyword, resulting in an immediate fine. To reclaim the money, the neighbor had to record a 3-minute apology, reading aloud a soothing script drafted by the administrator. The locals took this all in stride, and no one questioned the unreasonableness of the rules. It was tacitly accepted that the psychological well-being of ordinary people took precedence over the freedom of public communication. In March, as spring blossoms arrived, the community launched a pet registration drive requiring all pet-owning residents to submit their pets' details. Leo, the 29-year-old social worker in charge of registration, known for her gentle nature and friendliness, introduced additional regulations for pet naming. Names for pet dogs could not feature harsh, abrupt sounds, such as Mark, Kane, or Jack, as these were believed to carry aggressive sound waves that polluted the community's spiritual environment. Cat names could not include words related to flowers or fruits, as these symbolized the withering of life and could induce collective melancholy. Pets with non-compliant names were given a deadline to change them. Failure to do so resulted in the cancellation of their residency registration and forced expulsion from the town. Many dog owners were compelled to rename pets they had raised for years and update their registration documents. Though heartbroken, they dared not resist. While not law enforcement officers, these social workers wielded authority over registration and thus controlled the rules for naming small animals. Seemingly gentle and harmless, the regulations were, in fact, incredibly domineering. In April, amidst the spring rains, I visited the town's chain supermarket to stock up on supplies. Wendy, the 38-year-old front-end supervisor, an ordinary mid-level manager, had established an unwritten rule for the checkout process: a customer's smile had to fall within a range of 15 to 25 degrees. A smile that was too slight appeared cold and rude, while one that was too broad created emotional pressure. Cashiers carried a mobile app to measure angles and assess customers' expressions in real time. If the angle was non-compliant, service was refused. Checkout was denied, and customers were ordered to leave the premises to rectify their behavior. Many residents, already in low spirits due to the rainy weather and wearing impassive expressions, were repeatedly refused service at the checkout. The supermarket's legal department fully backed this stance, ruling that employee emotional well-being took precedence over consumer transactions, meaning a compliant facial expression was a prerequisite for making a purchase. Furthermore, the fresh produce section was demarcated into 8 exclusive air territories, each assigned to a specific staff member. Customers passing through these zones were forbidden from making any noise with their footsteps, as treading upon an employee's air territory incurred a penalty fee for noise-induced emotional distress. Faced with exorbitant prices and a web of petty rules, the townspeople had no choice but to compromise and comply. In May, when the weather turned fair, I signed up for a free community art class for adults. The instructor was a part-time art teacher, an ordinary 40-year-old office worker who stocked shelves at the supermarket by day and taught classes by night, operating independently without a formal position in arts education. The class enforced absurd rules. When drawing, horizontal strokes were strictly prohibited, as horizontal lines were said to sap vitality, so one could only use vertical strokes. Mixing green and orange was forbidden, as the clash between these two colors was believed to generate emotional toxins, and one's breathing rhythm during class had to synchronize with the rhythm of the background music, and the pace of breathing were out of sync, disrupting the creative atmosphere of the class. The 15 students, all ordinary office workers or retirees, held their breath and moved their pens stiffly. What was meant to be a relaxing, stress-relieving public service class had become tense and stifling. Afterward, I spoke to the instructor, hoping he might loosen the rules. He seemed deeply aggrieved, explaining that he suffered from chronic anxiety and relied on color and specific brushwork techniques to steady his mind. He felt that people should be understanding of the mental struggles faced by ordinary individuals. At that moment, I couldn't argue with him, yet I realized something profound. Behind every seemingly absurd rule lay an ordinary person's inflated sense of entitlement, using their own vulnerability to hold public order hostage. It was early summer, and at the local vehicle inspection center, Dennis, a 47-year-old with 5 years of experience, was handling annual inspections. Known for his meticulousness and rare errors, he was widely regarded by his colleagues as a reliable employee. However, he had unilaterally imposed an unwritten rule: vehicle trunks could not contain black tools, as he believed the color black absorbed the safety lock of the drive. Furthermore, interior hanging ornaments could not feature wood grain, as he believed would affecting the driver's focus. On the day of the annual inspection, car owners were forbidden from wearing canvas shoes, as the tread patterns on the soles supposedly disrupted the traffic magnetic field. Many owners spent considerable time modifying their vehicle interiors and changing their attire beforehand. Leadership at the Vehicle Administration Office tacitly condoned this practice for years, citing the need to respect the professional intuition of frontline clerks, which was deemed legally protected and immune to forced intervention. Rulings of non-compliance were based entirely on the clerk's subjective impressions.